Welcome to Closer to Venus. I'm Johnny Burke, and today's guest is Dr. Kathy Forti. She is a clinical psychologist, Egyptian mystery school teacher, and author of Fractals of God, which describes her near-death experience that she had in 2003. Today we'll discuss how this experience revealed much of what is known as the unseen world. Kathy, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you, Johnny, for having me. Yes. I have to say that I've had strange experiences all my life, but my experience in 2003, my near death, set me on a whole different path than clinical psychology. So you never know where you're going to land in life, do you?
No, you do not. So speaking of clinical psychology, how did you go from being a psychologist to an Egyptian mystery school teacher?
Well, after I had my near-death experience and came back with otherworldly guidance, very geeky guidance, which I'll speak about later, they said it was time for me to return to Egypt to really get back in touch with my roots. I did. And I had some really incredible opening experiences there and recall of past lives that I'd had there, of some very strange things. And I start coming back every year, and then I start bringing groups with me, because the more I was there, the more information I remembered from the past. And it wasn't the Egyptian traditional narrative of their history at all. So it was quite different.
I can imagine. And I've heard quite a bit about the Egyptians being connected to the star people, being connected with Atlantis and Lemuria and other ancient civilizations. So I have to ask, so past lives, how far back, if you had to guess, what century or what millennia was it?
Well, we're talking probably more than 14,000 years ago. Atlantis, when they had the last and third flood upheaval of Atlantis, then they had many outposts all over the world. So they brought a lot of their knowledge, the survivors, the refugees who still had that information, to Egypt. And suddenly Egypt, which was not as advanced, suddenly became very advanced.
Out of nowhere.
Yeah, out of nowhere.
Right. Out of nowhere. How many times have we heard that? Good Lord.
Yes, it was just divine intervention came down and suddenly they were totally enlightened, right? Doesn't happen that way. There was many refugees. And again, they knew that should this happen again, they needed to preserve some of that knowledge and that insight into their past and man's history and so forth like that. Unfortunately, even until the early 1800s, people would say that there was limestone casing on the Great Pyramid, and it was filled with engravings that would have filled many books. And then they took it down and used it in building projects in Cairo and other places, and not realizing that, oh my gosh, you just wrecked what probably was a little bit of a time capsule of what was the past, what happened in the past.
You mentioned that the narrative of the Egyptians is not quite accurate because there's some things that happened there that is not in the history books. Tell us about that.
Well, first of all, if you go to Egypt now, the official Egyptology narrative is that the pyramids are pretty much no older than 4,000 years old. Of course, those who have any discerning knowledge or have read anything who have that job kind of do it with a wink and a nod. And the reason that they have to keep the 4,000-year narrative is because anything that came way before Allah creates a problem with their religion. And of course, we know that lots of things in religion that don't jive, that's the first thing that they're more likely to keep hidden so as not to bring up controversy and so forth like that. There was a few of the temples that I gravitated to immediately. One was Abydos, which was home to the Melchizedek priesthood. Of course, they didn't know it then, but I knew it was the visionaries. It was the priest to the priests. Many of the Atlantean priests and so forth who were still around gravitated to that special spot. And even the pharaohs, they may have had their tombs in the Valley of the Kings, but they made sure they had a sort of second or fake tomb at Abydos because they knew that that was closer to the gods. When they call it a sacred temple, means there's only an older temple built underneath. And of course, they're not going to destroy the temple that already exists there. And that was the problem. So a lot of things go back many, many, many years. And most of the pharaohs were just involved in restoration projects, like We have our historical buildings now. We keep trying to shore up and make sure that they aren't destroyed. It was the same thing back then. I remember the Egyptians were very methodical about proportion and size and geometry and everything else. You only have to take one look at the Sphinx and go, well, wait a minute, something's wrong here. We've got a big body and a tiny little head on top of it. That doesn't sound very Egyptian. Over the years, I've been able to get some of the earlier pictures that go back to the 1700s of the Sphinx, and it looked kind of nothing like it did now. There's been so much restoration that the body is kind of distorted. But when I saw back in ancient times, I saw that it wasn't a lion as they supposed. It was actually what looked like a dog, a jackal, which would make sense because Anubis was the god of the protection of the Giza Plateau, what they called Russel back then. And he was the god of the afterlife, of mummification, of protecting the grave. And so much of that body was hidden under the sands of Egypt for so many years. And of course, if you had a big head, I'm sure it crumbled over time. And so maybe it left a bit of a nub. And a pharaoh, I believe it was the second dynasty or something like that. I forgot his name, Amenhotep, I think it was the second or so. He came around and he thought, well, I'm going to put the likeness of myself on that head. With the headdress that looks just like that period of time. He actually looks like the pharaoh we have pictures of that time. So, he decided to do something with it. So we actually have another restoration project. So if you go back and look at it, I remember it just didn't look anything like that. And when I'd go to Saqqara, which were all the sound healers and the temples there, that's the 5-step pyramid. I'd said, well, there was a temple here. It was called the Temple Beautiful. The Temple Sacrifice were here. And they had this thing in the very center of the courtyard. And they said, oh, that's for the carts to go around. And I said, no, that was where the opening used to be, going down into the temple.
You remember that?
Yes. And years ago, after I said that, they finally did do excavations and found that, yes, it was an opening to a temple. So some of us still remember things. I don't remember everything, but that's how I discovered that there were water tunnels underneath the Great Pyramid from my mind's eyes. And I got to go down there and actually see them.
What are some of the things that you remember, which many of us still think are myth and superstition? Half-breed creatures and things that are depicted in Egyptian art, which seem impossible to be real.
One thing that they don't talk about, and I haven't really read it anywhere, we all know that obviously Atlantis was a very advanced civilization, much more advanced than we are even now. And that's kind of interesting because we've had such an explosion in technology and development, because a lot of those souls from Atlantis have been reincarnated in the last 100 years. So they're tapped into that old knowledge, even if they're consciously not aware of it. What I saw was that the Atlanteans were experts in AI, in artificial intelligence and cloning. And I'm going to say something that I don't think I've seen anywhere, but this is what I saw from my perspective, that Anubis, the god Anubis, was actually AI.
Really?
It was not a real god. It was an AI kind of robotic thing. And you could distinguish man from robotics, and they made it into almost like a guard dog robot. And then years later, I remember reading something that the great sleeping prophet Edgar Cayce said. We've all known that there's supposedly some hall of records under the right paw of the Sphinx. But he did say it wouldn't be found until the right time in man's history or development, and that there was a sleeping sentry on duty that would prevent it from being opened before it was supposed to. And when I heard this, I immediately flashed on Anubis, the guard sentry. They left an AI kind of robot in charge there. So that I hadn't heard anywhere else, but I was seeing this.
You were seeing that?
Yeah. So here we are again at a stage in AI development where people are seeing we could be doing ourselves in by it, while others are saying, oh my God, it'll free man and he'll have so much time to do other stuff, not realizing that there was a reason, I think, that the ancient Egyptians were really into the afterlife. They mummified their bodies. The pharaohs made sure that their pets, their loved ones, their servants were all mummified and put in the tomb. So if you were a servant of the pharaoh, you died when he did. They preserved their organs in canopic jar, their heart and lung and things like that so that they could pick them up and be reactivated at another time in the active life. I think that they learned from the ancient Atlanteans that the Atlanteans were into cloning. And at some point in time, cloning would come back in, and they believed that cloning was not just your physical traits that you would look alike, but that you also contained the knowledge that you had acquired over that lifetime was somehow encapsulated into your cellular structure, your DNA. And so that one could reawaken what they knew in the past life. And if you made a clone from a clone, you would just be adding on to what the one before it knew. And I think that they realized that they could live in the future, bypass a soul, and live forever. And that was the key to be immortal like the gods.
I have heard that from other speakers before. Not the AI part, but living a very long time and perhaps even forever. Let's talk about the NDE. How are the past lives in Egypt and your knowledge download from that, if you will? How is that related to your NDE, if at all?
All it told me was about that. The knowledge that I brought back from my near-death experience was something that I had learned during Atlantean times and that I had a knowledge of in the temples of Egypt. As someone who worked in the temples, in the priesthood, and unto the temple of the Abydos, the visionaries, they knew what was going on. So I kind of had to reawaken what was the knowledge I already had and what was being downloaded after the near-death experience. So I could kind of mesh the two and make an understanding of it. Because I remember something after I had developed my technology as a result of my near-death experience, I remember somebody coming up to me and saying, I remember this technology well during Atlantean times. It's just packaged in a different form. And I didn't think I'd see it again in my lifetime. I thought it would have to be down the road a bit.
So you remember the technology from thousands and thousands of years ago. What else did you see during your NDE?
Well, according to some people, my NDE was very uneventful. It's not like I sat on Jesus's lap or saw the angel or whatnot. They stopped me before I could go into the white light. I was in the tunnel, hovering there. And later I thought, well, if I'm dead, why can't I go into the light? And I tried to will myself into it, and it wasn't working. And I said to myself, well, this is boring. And that's when all this energy and this new guidance poured into me and sent me back through the tunnel, and half my body was paralyzed coming back into it. But later I found out that I wasn't meant to come back to this dimension in my next lifetime. And by going into the light, it, in essence, kind of was a reincarnation trap. You would keep coming back here to this dimension. And I wasn't meant to come back to this dimension when I left. So they said I was from somewhere else. So we won't go into that. So I said, well, what do I do then? When I die, what do I do? And they said, a lot of times the white light is relatives, dead relatives saying, Kathy, come here, come here. They said, no, just be still in the void. And your own inner soul will direct you to where you need to be. Just trust in that process. You will know where to go. You will know where to go.
How did you know that you were not meant to come back to this dimension?
Well, I've always said since I was a child, I'm not coming back here. I kind of knew it was my last lifetime on this dimension. I wasn't quite sure where I was going, but I knew I wasn't coming back. It didn't put the two and two together because I thought other people get to go into the light. Why can't I go into the light? You know, what's wrong? And that's when I was informed why I couldn't go into the light, because my soul had already chosen that path. This was my last lifetime on third dimensional Earth.
Another person that shares that distinction is the Long Island medium. Apparently, in one of her books, she did share that this was her last incarnation. I thought, well, she must feel lucky, I guess.
All the dimensions have their own lessons to it. It doesn't mean you're sitting up there with, with a harp and a celestial choir or anything. There's going to be a lot of souls that this might be their last time on this dimension. Since the fourth dimension fell during the time of Atlantis, they'd be going to the fifth dimensional Terra. Now that's going to present some challenges as well. A large influx of soul that looks like Earth, but has a lot of different things, that are totally different. We don't need communication devices like our phones and and our iPads and all that kind of thing. And we kind of know what everybody's working on. So it's not a place of deception and lies because everybody kind of knows what's going on. It will maybe actually jumpstart souls from fifth dimension if they're ready to move up. And I feel a lot of souls on this dimension have become kind of complacent. You know, it got comfortable. They've got lineage, ancestral lineage here and so forth. I usually find a lot that are ready to pass on have opted not to have children in this lifetime. So there'd be no ancestral ties left behind.
Interesting point. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Tell us a little bit more about the technology that you rediscovered during the experience and how it came from Atlantis and what it actually does.
Well, one of the things that these new guidance that came through, they claim they were from the eighth dimension. They were light beings, so it's not like they had names or I saw them. I could feel them and I could hear them. I'm not necessarily the type of person who sees things like auric fields and so forth, but I sense and feel that. And when I came back from the near-death experience, I was obsessed with quantum physics, and they were getting me up in the middle of the night to research all these things on the internet between 3 and 4 a.m., and I was understanding them, and that's not my background. They were also correcting what was accurate and what wasn't accurate from as far as man has developed in its understanding of that particular subject in science. So this was going on for a long time. And to make a long story short, I resisted at first working with them because I thought, this is not my thing to invent software, to invent a device. They pretty much said, you know what you're doing. And I kept thinking, no, I don't. When I finally kind of relinquished that resistance and said, okay, well, what do you think I can do? That's when the downloads started happening. I started being able to see visions of things. I would hear voices in my head, and I'd actually have downloads of concepts that I didn't have before. And basically, the first thing they started to show me was that everything in the universe has a mathematical signature to it. Our DNA is mathematically coded. We need to speak to the consciousness of ourselves in a language it understands, which is actually math. And I'm thinking to myself at the time, this has got to be a cosmic joke because math was my worst subject in school. But that happened for a reason as well, since I didn't have any preconceived notions from the mathematical universe of knowledge that exists right now in our time that's saying, well, that won't work. It started with the 5-year. They were showing me the algorithms for thousands of different substances, emotions, whether they be minerals or vitamins or herbs or concepts or so forth like that. Vitamin C has a mathematical signature to it. So if I can give that mathematical algorithm straight to the body, it doesn't necessarily have to take the physical form of vitamin C. Then they got me into the science of fractals, which is like those nesting dolls, a doll within a doll within a doll to infinity. And we are all fractal beings of a greater kind of Godhead, you know, we're all part of that. That's why I called my book Fractals of God. So it incorporated the science of fractals, which I had never heard of, but they were using it in a way which I would never have assumed. They said when you couple fractals with information, it amplifies the information, the algorithms, the codes coming through to the human, to the body. They had certain types of sounds that they wanted in there. So it was based not on frequency at all, unless you think of certain sounds as frequency, but math, pure math. And then I thought, how do I put this into a software program, but how do you give it to the person? And they looked inside my memory to see what I already had existing there. And I saw the picture of Superman in the Fortress of Solitude downloading the history of his race through these big, giant crystals. And I thought, crystals? You want me to attach crystals to a laptop computer or something like that? So that became the process that these crystals had to be a certain thing. They had to be lab grown for clarity so that they could take the information immediately and let go of it. Regular crystals trap in information. It had to be a certain type of crystals.
These are healing technologies, aren't they?
Yes. So we have found a way to actually use a digital to analog signal box because crystals are analog. The human body is analog. Mostly people are usually going from analog to digital. We were going the opposite, digital to analog. So you could plug in the signal box into your computer and it would stream these algorithms, particular programs that we put together, come through the crystals, which you held in your hands, or you could put anywhere on your body. And there was no electrical current coming through, but people oftentimes would report that they not only felt it, sometimes they'd felt pulsing or tingling or warmth. Some people didn't feel anything at all, but then they would report changes and differences. Apparently, the Atlanteans learned a lot from the Arcturians. They were like the master evolved race, and they were very much into crystal.
When I hear people talking about crystals, one of the first things I think of is Atlantis, because apparently crystals were used in a variety of ways. One of the destructive ways is that crystals can produce lasers that could destroy whole cities, apparently. So
exactly,
you're saying they learned that from the Arcturians?
Well, they learned the power of crystals, but the Atlanteans found their own spin on it, just like our Department of Defense and our military finds a way to weaponize things. Crystals can be used for immense healing and good, and they can also be used for destruction as well. They got into AI, the Atlanteans, and AI combined with some of their misuse of crystals is what did them in. And that's why I think right now that information, it's probably coming close to its time because we're getting so far advanced into AI. I think they put that information in several outposts around the world. It wasn't just the Sphinx. I think that probably will be coming online soon. So I fought against people have wanted to use the algorithms, can I use this and I'll do it in my technology and everything. And I've always said no. I've always turned down any money on that because what can be used for good can be used for bad as well. And you don't know how they're going to use it because this can be used remotely on a person as well as in person use of this technology.
Speaking of remote, you know how to do remote viewing.
Yeah.
All right. How did you discover that ability?
Well, at one time, I lived briefly up in Northern California, and I was invited to a New Year's Eve party where Russel Targ was there. Russel Targ and Hal Puthoff were part of the Stanford Research psychic spying for the government, and with the likes of Ingo Swann and those guys doing remote viewing. They were teaching that for the military and doing experiments on it. So we got to talking at this party, and he says, anybody can do it. And so a number of us got together and he taught us. And it's just a matter of practice. So I have seen a lot of strange things out in the cosmos doing psychic viewing. I remember once saying that I came across a huge spaceship outside the rings of Saturn. I once talked with a military person in the know, and he said, well, when we set the Cassini satellite on this mission to Saturn, we saw it, and it really did freak out a lot of people. It's very close. Who knows how long it's been there. And he said, so most of those images were all scrubbed. I've only been able to find one of a heat-sensitive picture. It's just like I saw that the sun is a portal. I saw ships coming out of this sort of black triangular spot, which you can see if you look at the sun. There is somewhat of a black triangular spot on it, and they were coming out of that area. And at first there was like outbursts of it when I saw it remote viewing, and I thought it was like a coronal burst or ejection or something. Then I saw it was a ship coming in from that some other dimension to this dimension. So I was watching and I saw a ship moving towards it. And I thought, I don't know if I can do this. It's sort of like a cosmic hitchhiker. I tried to remotely hitch a ride on the ship going through this portal of the sun. And it went really fast. It was like going through a horizon event at warp speed and going through this portal. And on the other side were the most amazing colors I'd ever seen, magentas and purples and blues, and it was just brilliant. And there was all these ships lined up almost in an arc formation. They were beaming light at the ships coming through and I had the feeling like it was some type of cosmic decontamination coming from one dimension to another. It also illuminated who was on the ship, sort of like a maritime ship flying its country's colors. This particular ship that I hitched a ride on showed purple, and they let it through right away. And as soon as they let it through, I was ejected back out. So I don't know who was on that ship, but I've been ejected out of a lot of places, remote viewing in space, I'll tell you.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You've had a lot of extraordinary experiences. The near-death experience, for one, memories of past life in Egypt and Atlantis as well?
Yeah, yes.
What are some of the things that you saw during your time in Atlantis, which you can say these things are not myth because I saw them?
No, I did see that some creatures that look mythological as a result of some of the cloning that they did. And I think when some of those creatures actually survived where the ancient Egyptians, they had their Temple Beautiful and Temple of Sacrifice to help these creatures, half man, half beast, pretty much, kind of work with their disability, you might say. I'm positive to this day the Serapeum, or Serapeum as some people call it, that's near Saqqara, and it has these huge sarcophagus vaults sizes that they say, oh, it was for the big Apis bulls. And I looked at it and I said, no, it wasn't. At one time, what they were trying to do is to make sure this DNA was never used again, never replicated. I don't know what happened to it, but they thought they would bury it deep down under. Nobody had ever made sense of what the serapeum was actually for. The Egyptians, when they don't know, they make up a story. And they said, must have been for the bulls because they were big enough for big, huge sacred bulls or something. But my vision of Atlantis that I still kind of carry to this day was standing on the shore and seeing a huge, I don't know which upheaval it was or which flood, but I saw like a tsunami coming and I knew I was going to die. And to this day, I'm still nervous around big waves. So you still haven't been able to kind of let go of that because I knew I drowned. Yeah.
Any other instances of technology without me asking any more leading questions?
You mean during Atlantean times?
Yeah.
Oh my God, they had healing mechanisms for just about everything. And I think that a lot of times, where did the Atlanteans get it from? Well, they got it a lot from Arcturians. Not too many people talk about the Arcturian Atlantean link. So then you'd have to ask, well, where did the Arcturians get it from? Well, the cosmos is very, very, very old, hundreds of thousands of years old, billions of years old. And we just all teach each other. After a lot of the ancient Atlanteans left the Egyptian land or died, the Egyptians then, they could not make a pyramid like the original one if their life depended on it. If they tried it, they all collapsed. They could not retain that precise geometry and knowledge. And of course, the Great Pyramid was used for many different things. At first, it was used as a way to help stabilize the Earth grid. It was never used for a tomb, by the way. Then it was used for its electromagnetic properties and its plants, hydroelectric power, which is why the waters run underneath the tunnels. Water tunnels are all underneath the pyramid. And the other pyramids, Chichen Itza, Teotihuacan in Mexico, the Bosnian pyramid, they all have water tunnels built underneath them. When you got to ask yourself, there's got to be a reason why they built water tunnels.
Right. All over the world.
Yes. And then later on, it was used initiations and rites and ceremonies and so forth like that. So it's had many uses over the years, but never as a tomb.
So the theories of flying machines going back thousands of years ago is not so far-fetched.
Oh, no. I mean, if you go back to the ancient texts, the Ramayana, Mahabharata, and things like that, the fireballs in the sky, nuclear energy, there's a place in Egypt in the desert. Well, first of all, they find a lot of whale bones in the deserts, the Sahara Desert, which tells you it had to have been underwater at one time.
At one point, right.
They also have found areas where there's nothing but green glass on the sand, like sheets of it. They couldn't figure out what caused this until somebody who was around years ago during the Nevada nuclear testing said when we did those tests, it turned the sand, the silica in the sand, to green glass. So it tells us somewhere down the line in ancient times, there must have been some type of nuclear energy or power. I once tried to bring some of that green glass through an airport detector. Everything went off.
Wow.
Yes.
That would have been quite a souvenir.
Yeah. And then I started thinking, well, maybe it's still radioactive after all these thousands of years. Maybe this is not such a good idea. But I knew what it was. But nobody knows what it's really from. It just looks interesting, the color.
Probably from some kind of nuclear holocaust, some battle,
Exactly.
some thousands of years ago. So
yes, when will we ever learn? We're just repeating the past over and over and over again.
what are some of the most important takeaways so far from your experiences? Things that we common folk need to know?
Well, not everything is as it appears to be. And to keep an open mind. I always joke, not such an open mind where your brain falls out, but to keep an open mind about things and saying, oh no, that can't possibly be true, because we find out later, it's just like all the conspiracy theories of the world. Later on, they turned out to be truth. And I just call them spoiler alerts now. You just don't poo-poo everything up front that it's not possible just because you don't understand it or you haven't had that experience yourself.
And speaking of conspiracy theories, we didn't get a chance to go about discussing your sci-fi truth series, the Stack series, which I believe will have to be dealt with in a part 2. You agree?
Okay. All right.
To be continued. Kathy, thanks so much for joining us tonight, or your morning time in Hawaii. In the meantime, how can our listeners learn more about you online?
Well, they can go to trinfinity8.com or ascension11.com, or they can catch me, Kathy Forti, on Facebook or Twitter or so forth.
I will put your link in the show notes and the transcript as well. You've been listening to Closer to Venus. I'm Johnny Burke. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing. In the meantime, you can find more info at closertovenus.com. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.